It may be a surprise to some when I tell you that amid the most catastrophic battle in human history, in the frozen ruins of a city that had become synonymous with death itself, there occurred what some have called a Christmas miracle. But as we shall see, this was no miracle at all. Rather, it was a story of profound tragedy, deliberate deception, and the ultimate collapse of faith in both earthly and divine powers. What happened at Stalingrad during Christmas 1942 reveals truths so devastating that the Nazi regime itself deemed them Untragbar, unbearable, and locked them away in archives where they remained hidden for years. The Battle of Stalingrad, which raged from July 1942 to February 1943, stands as perhaps the greatest catastrophe in German military history. By Christmas of 1942, the once mighty German Sixth Army under General Friedrich von Paulus, some 270,000 men strong, found itself completely encircled in the shattered remains of the city on the Volga. To understand how this came to pass, we must first examine what military historian S.L.A. Marshall termed one of the most grievous sins of generalship: irreparable overextension. On the 21st of August 1942, advance elements of the Sixth Army first reached the banks of the Volga River. The approach had been characterized not as a hard-fought battle, but rather as a victory march into a void. This initial success, sweeping across the vast Russian steppe with minimal resistance, fostered what contemporary accounts describe as a state of blind confidence and euphoria among the German troops. The very sight of their own immense power, stretching as far as the eye could see with seemingly nothing on the horizon to challenge it, created a dangerous hypnosis in which normal military caution was, as one officer put it, drugged by overconfidence. The Sixth Army was the largest fighting force Nazi Germany had ever assembled, 250,000 men who believed they were invincible. Yet this very might became its own narcotic, lulling commanders into a false sense of security regarding their desperately exposed position. The army was connected to its rear by only a vulnerable armed corridor, its flanks protected not by German troops, but by Romanian armies whose combat effectiveness was questionable at best. As early as late September 1942, one corps commander, General von Wietersheim, recognized the extreme peril of their situation. After weathering armored attacks from the north, he urgently recommended that all German forces be withdrawn westward from the Volga to the Don River, some 60 kilometers distant. For this prescient but unwelcome advice, he was promptly relieved of command and disgraced. The last opportunity to avert complete disaster had been squandered on the altar of prestige and hubris. Meanwhile, Hitler, driven by considerations of propaganda rather than military necessity, began pressing for stronger attacks directly against the city itself. This pressure irretrievably committed the Sixth Army's elite formations to brutal house-to-house fighting, a type of urban warfare for which they were ill-prepared and which consumed men at an appalling rate. By November, the army had been pushed into the narrow confines of the ruined city, clinging to positions along the Volga's western bank. On the 19th of November 1942, the catastrophe that Wietersheim had foreseen came to terrible fruition. At dawn, General Rokossovsky's tank army struck with overwhelming force from its bridgehead north of the Don River, driving southward. Simultaneously, another Soviet army attacked from bridgeheads south of Stalingrad. These two armored thrusts swiftly collapsed the Romanian armies covering the Sixth Army's flanks and rear. When the Soviet pincers met at Kalach on the 23rd of November, the trap was sprung. General von Paulus and his 250,000 men were completely encircled. What followed was a catastrophic failure of leadership at the highest levels. From his headquarters, some 2,100 kilometers away in East Prussia, Adolf Hitler's megalomania forbade any attempt by the Sixth Army to break out while it still possessed the strength to do so. The Führer decreed that Stalingrad would become a fortress to be held at all costs. In the field, von Paulus proved, in Marshall's assessment, either too weak-kneed or too stupid to defy these suicidal orders. Hitler effectively bought Paulus's compliance by promoting him to General Feldmarschall or Field Marshal, on the 30th of January 1943, making him the first German field marshal to surrender in the field. Hitler's later comment reveals his contempt. "What hurts me most personally is that I promoted Paulus to field marshal. With escape forbidden, the only hope for the trapped men lay in a relief effort from outside." Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring had rashly promised that the Luftwaffe could supply the pocket entirely by air, claiming to deliver 500 tons of supplies daily. This proved to be a grotesque overestimation. The Sixth Army required approximately 600 tons per day for normal operations, with 300 tons representing the bare minimum for survival. In reality, the airlift averaged just over 100 tons per day, and frequently far less. On the 10th of December, General Oberst or Colonel General Hermann Hoth launched Operation Winter Storm, a desperate attempt to cut a corridor to the encircled army. The 57th Panzer Corps attacked eastward, briefly capturing the town of Verkhnechumsky and reaching the Mishkova River. For several days, the sounds of battle from the relief force grew steadily closer, and the men trapped in Stalingrad prepared themselves for a final breakout to meet their liberators. But Hitler steadfastly refused to authorize the simultaneous breakout that might have saved them. By the 23rd of December, still some 55 kilometers short of their objective, Hoth's relief force was met by superior Soviet armored units and brought to a complete halt. On Christmas Eve, the 4th Panzer Army began its withdrawal. The proud 6th Army had become, in Marshall's phrase, the Legion of the Damned. As Christmas Eve dawned on the 24th of December 1942, the situation inside what the Germans called the Kessel or Cauldron had become truly desperate. Temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius. Food rations had been reduced to starvation levels, 100 grams of bread and a small portion of horse meat per day when available. Ammunition stocks were critically depleted. Medical supplies had run out weeks earlier. Men were freezing to death at their posts, and typhus was beginning to spread through the crowded bunkers. That evening, the German people gathering around their radios at home were treated to an extraordinary broadcast, what was called the Weihnachtsring-Sendung, or Christmas Ring broadcast. This was presented as a live relay connecting German forces across the entire breadth of the Reich's holdings, from the frozen Arctic port of Lenakamari in Norway to the burning deserts of North Africa, from the besieged city of Leningrad to the beaches of Crete. One by one, each outpost was called, and the soldiers there would offer Christmas greetings to the homeland and to their comrades elsewhere. The climax of this elaborate production came when the announcer called Stalingrad. A clear, strong voice responded, "Here is Stalingrad, Fortress Stalingrad on the Volga. The soldiers of the 6th Army send greetings to the homeland and to all our comrades." Then, in perfect harmony, a German army choir sang Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, Silent Night, Holy Night. The broadcast concluded with all stations across Europe and Africa joining together in song, a powerful image of a united front standing firm across vast distances. It was, however, a complete and utter fabrication. The German army choir that supposedly sang from their positions in Fortress Stalingrad was actually broadcasting from the safety of Berlin, some 2,000 kilometers away. The entire elaborate production had been recorded over approximately 6 days, with technical interference and connection difficulties deliberately added to create an illusion of authenticity. Communications from Stalingrad had in fact ceased a full week before Christmas. The last functioning radio link had been severed when Soviet forces overran key relay stations. For the men actually trapped in Stalingrad, listening to this broadcast on whatever functioning radios remained was a moment of profound humiliation and betrayal. One officer wrote, "We sat around a single candle in our bunker and listened as the radio claimed to broadcast from Stalingrad. When we heard the choir singing Silent Night, supposedly from positions just meters away from where we huddled, we knew we had been abandoned. The tears came not from joy, but from rage and despair. The regime had turned our suffering into a propaganda performance. The truth of their situation stood in stark contrast to the sanitized image broadcast to Germany. As one soldier, Hans Erdmann Schönbeck, a 20-year-old officer with the 24th Panzer Division, recorded, "The noise of battle from the relief army had been getting closer day by day. We were geared up for the last leap westwards to meet our liberators, but only in our minds, for we knew we were almost out of fuel and ammunition. With the first day of Christmas came the full, awful certainty. The relief troops were unable to make it. The battle sounds were getting fainter and moving to the west. Our thoughts of escape had been in vain. Yet amid this encompassing darkness, there occurred a moment of genuine spiritual searching, something that would indeed come to be called the Stalingrad Madonna." The story centers on Lieutenant Kurt Reuber, a 36-year-old Wehrmacht staff physician and Protestant pastor serving with the 16th Panzer Division. Before the war, Reuber had been a village priest in Wichmannshausen, a small community in Hessen. Though trained in theology, he had later pursued his childhood dream of becoming a doctor. When conscripted into the Wehrmacht in the autumn of 1939, he served in both capacities, tending to wounded bodies and troubled souls alike. By December 1942, Reuber found himself in a bunker carved from frozen mud on the outskirts of ruined Stalingrad. In the days leading up to Christmas, he wrestled with how to provide his comrades with some measure of spiritual comfort in their dire circumstances. In a letter that would later reach his family, he described his process. "I have turned my hole in the frozen mud into a studio. The space is too small for me to be able to see the picture properly, so I climb onto a stool and look down at it from above to get the perspective right. Everything is repeatedly knocked over and my pencils vanish into the mud. There is nothing to lean my picture against, except a sloping homemade table which I can just manage to squeeze past. There are no proper materials, and I have used a Russian map for paper. But I wish I could tell you how absorbed I have been painting my Madonna, and how much it means to me." The image Reuber created was simple but profoundly moving. Using charcoal on the reverse side of a captured Soviet military map, he drew the Virgin Mary wrapped in a large shawl, holding the infant Jesus close to her cheek. The piece measured approximately 900 millimeters by 1,200 millimeters. On the right border, he inscribed 3 words from the Gospel of John: Licht, Leben, Liebe, light, life, love. On the left side he wrote Weihnachten im Kessel 1942, Christmas in encircled, the Cauldron 1942. At the bottom appeared the words Festung Stalingrad, Fortress Stalingrad. Reuber later described what happened when he revealed the drawing to his comrades on Christmas Eve. "When, according to ancient custom, I opened the Christmas door, the slatted door of our bunker, and the comrades went in. They stood as if entranced, devout and too moved to speak in front of the picture on the clay wall below, which a light was burning on a log driven into the earthen wall. The entire celebration took place under the influence of the picture, and they thoughtfully read the words, light, life, love. Whether commander or simple soldier, the Madonna was always an object of outward and inward contemplation. In the days that followed, soldiers from other units would make their way through the frozen ruins to Reuber's bunker, simply to stand before the Madonna for a few moments, seeking whatever solace it might provide. For some, it offered comfort. For others, it posed questions they could no longer answer. The irony was that even as Reuber created this image of divine maternal protection, many of his comrades were experiencing a complete crisis of faith in any higher power. The letters written in these final weeks, later seized by the German High Command and suppressed for their devastating content, reveal a spiritual catastrophe as complete as the military one. The German authorities had allowed the soldiers one final opportunity to send mail home, ostensibly as a humanitarian gesture, but actually as a means to gauge troop morale. 7 bags of letters were placed aboard the last transport plane to leave the pocket in January 1943. Upon arrival in Germany, they were immediately seized on Hitler's orders. The addresses and senders' names were removed, and the letters were classified by content and sent to the Bureau of Army Information for statistical analysis. The results provided what officials termed a devastating picture of 6th Army morale. The statistical breakdown revealed an army that had overwhelmingly lost faith in its leadership. Positive attitude toward the leadership, 2.1%. Doubtful attitude, 4.4%. Negative attitude, 57.4%. Actively opposed, 3.4%. Indifferent, 33%. Over 90% of the soldiers expressed attitudes ranging from doubtful to actively hostile or simply indifferent. For an army built on the principle of absolute faith in the Führer, this represented total ideological collapse. But it was not only faith in Hitler that had crumbled. For many, the senselessness of their suffering had triggered a profound loss of religious belief itself. One soldier wrote to his pastor father, a man who had raised him in Christian faith, words that remain among the most harrowing testimonies of the battle. "I have searched for God in every crater, in every destroyed house, on every corner, in every friend, in my foxhole, and in the sky. God did not show himself, even though my heart cried for him." In Stalingrad, to put the question of God's existence means to deny it. "I tell you this, Father, and it is hard, but I must. No, Father, there is no God." Another soldier wrote with similar despair, "If there is a God, I don't believe any longer that God can be good, for then he would not permit such great injustice. I don't believe in it anymore, for he would have enlightened the minds of those people who began this war. I don't believe in God anymore because he betrayed us." The letters systematically dismantled the heroic mythology of sacrifice that Nazi propaganda had so carefully constructed. One soldier, an actor in civilian life, wrote about the stark difference between theatrical death and biological reality. "Here they croak, starve to death, freeze to death. It's nothing but a biological fact, like eating and drinking. They go on dying without any elegance. That's what makes me so furious. I once played such death scenes a dozen times on the stage. Here I see the most ordinary biological factuality without the phrase making, without the hero's aura." Perhaps the most direct rebuttal to official propaganda came from a young soldier who had witnessed hundreds of his comrades die. "No one can tell me any longer that the men died with the words Deutschland or Heil Hitler on their lips. There is plenty of dying, no question of that. But the last word is mother or the name of someone dear or just a cry for help." When these findings reached propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, he personally declared them Untragbar, unbearable to the German nation. The word is significant. In the stark simplicities of Nazi jargon, Untragbar also meant exterminable. It was the same term the regime applied to those deemed unworthy of life. The truth from Stalingrad was so potent that it too was marked for suppression and annihilation. While the trapped soldiers endured their grim Christmas inside the pocket, while some prayed before Reuber's Madonna and others wept listening to the fake broadcast from Berlin, the final nail in their coffin was being hammered home. Some 240 kilometers to the southwest lay the Luftwaffe airfield at Tatsinskaya, the lifeline of the airlift. 180 Junkers, 52 transport aircraft were based there, representing the bulk of the Luftwaffe's capacity for supplying the pocket. At 0530 hours on Christmas Eve morning, Soviet tanks of the 24th Tank Corps smashed into the airfield. In a chaotic scene of destruction, Russian T-34s rammed the German transport planes on the runway like bumper cars. The sound of tearing metal and shattering glass echoed across the frozen steppe. 72 aircraft were completely destroyed. 124 managed to escape into the gray dawn sky, their pilots gunning engines and racing down runways even as tanks chased them, firing. The supplies were gone. The escape route was cut. The Christmas miracle was over before it began. For the men inside Stalingrad, this was their final death sentence, though most did not yet know it. The distant sounds of battle on Christmas Eve were not, as some hoped, the relief force breaking through. They were the death throes of their last lifeline. In the following days, average daily deliveries to the pocket dropped to under 60 tons, less than 1/10 of what the 6th Army required. After Christmas, the situation inside the Kessel deteriorated with appalling speed. By early January, the daily ration had been reduced to 50 grams of bread. Horses had long since been consumed. Men were reduced to boiling leather boots to create a gelatinous soup. Typhus, dysentery, and frostbite were epidemic. Soldiers simply dropped dead while standing at their posts or huddled in bunkers. Kurt Reuber's Madonna remained nailed to the bunker wall, and soldiers continued to visit it seeking comfort, though many now questioned what comfort it could possibly provide. On the 16th of January, the last functioning airfield at Potomnik fell to Soviet forces. The final evacuation flight departed on the 22nd of January from a makeshift runway at Gumrak. Among the last to be evacuated was Dr. Wilhelm Grosse, Reuber's battalion commander in the 16th Panzer Division. Reuber entrusted him with the Madonna, asking that it be delivered to his family. Grosse wrapped the charcoal drawing carefully and carried it with him on that final flight. Kurt Reuber himself was captured when the 6th Army surrendered on the 2nd of February, 1943. Of the 90,000 men who went into Soviet captivity, only about 6,000 would ever return to Germany. Reuber was not among them. He died of typhus in a prisoner of war camp at Yelabuga, some 1,000 kilometers northeast of Stalingrad, on the 20th of January 1944. Before his death, he created a second Madonna for the camp newspaper, which he titled The Prisoner's Madonna. The original Stalingrad Madonna survived. It was eventually delivered to Reuber's family and later donated to the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church in Berlin, where it has been on permanent display since 1983. The ruined church, itself a victim of Allied bombing, was preserved as a memorial to the futility of war. Copies of Reuber's Madonna now hang in the cathedrals of Berlin, Coventry, and Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad, as symbols of reconciliation between former enemies. The 7 bags of seized letters remained locked in German army archives in Potsdam throughout the remainder of the war. They were removed just days before the fall of Berlin in April 1945, and thus were preserved. In the years after the war, they were eventually published in West Germany under the title Letzte Briefe aus Stalingrad, Last Letters from Stalingrad. The book appeared in 1950 and was translated into numerous languages, including English in 1956. The impact was profound. Here was undeniable evidence from the soldiers' own hands of the complete moral, ideological, and spiritual bankruptcy of the Nazi regime. These were not Allied propaganda or Soviet fabrications. They were the authentic final words of German soldiers, seized by their own high command, and suppressed precisely because they told the truth. Brigadier General S.L.A. Marshall, who wrote the introduction to the American edition, concluded with words that transcend national boundaries. From the death plot of the Stalingrad pocket arises a dirge of melancholy unique in literature, the very song of the doomed. Amid the encompassing blackness, there is also a tenderness hardly less than sublime. The writers were Germans, in that hour our enemies, but who may read and not weep for them? The letters document what Marshall termed the slow march to degradation, despair, and death of an army betrayed by its leaders. Stripped of ideology and pretense, they reveal the universal human response to suffering and abandonment. A soldier writing to his wife urged her to remarry after a few months had passed, for Gertrude and Klaus need a father. An officer took responsibility for his small part in the catastrophe, writing, "I cannot deny my share of personal guilt in all this, but it is in a ratio of 1 to 70 million. I tell myself that by giving my life I have paid my debt." One man, torn between his wife and a mistress, wrote his last letter to his wife, asking forgiveness and requesting that she tell the other woman that he had found his way back at the end. "It will save the 3 of us ghastly tortures." Another recalled the simple pleasure of a grand piano discovered in a ruined house, where a conservatory-trained soldier played Beethoven's Appassionata for 100 men huddled in greatcoats, listening to sublime art amid the ruins. They were listening to Beethoven in Stalingrad, he wrote, even if they didn't understand him. The Battle of Stalingrad officially ended on the 2nd of February 1943. The German 6th Army, along with elements of the 4th Panzer Army and Romanian forces, had lost approximately 800,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. Soviet casualties were even higher, estimated at over 1,100,000 military personnel, plus some 40,000 civilians. It remains the bloodiest battle in human history. The strategic consequences were immense. Germany had lost an entire army, its prestige shattered, its aura of invincibility destroyed. The myth of German military superiority, so carefully cultivated since 1939, lay in ruins along the Volga. The initiative on the Eastern Front passed permanently to the Soviet Union. Nazi Germany would never again mount a successful strategic offensive in the East. But beyond the strategic and tactical lessons, Stalingrad stands as a testament to the catastrophic consequences of ideological fanaticism, strategic hubris, and leadership divorced from reality. Hitler's refusal to authorize a breakout when it was still possible, his insistence on holding a city for reasons of prestige rather than military necessity, his willingness to sacrifice an entire army rather than admit error. All of these decisions condemned hundreds of thousands of men to needless suffering and death. The Christmas of 1942 at Stalingrad was no miracle. It was a study in deliberate deception, profound suffering, and the collapse of faith in earthly and divine authority alike. The fake radio broadcast was a lie designed to maintain morale on the home front, while the men it purported to feature were freezing and starving. The Stalingrad Madonna was a genuine expression of spiritual yearning created amid total catastrophe. The Tatsinskaya raid destroyed the last hope of adequate supply, and the letters, the honest final words of doomed men, were deemed so dangerous to the regime that they had to be suppressed and hidden away. Yet those letters survived, as did the Madonna, to bear witness to the truth. They remind us that behind the grand strategies and the operational maps, behind the divisions and the casualty statistics, there were individual human beings who suffered, who hoped, who despaired, and who died largely for nothing. Their testimony endures as a warning about the human cost of war waged for ideology rather than genuine necessity. The German word Untragbar means unbearable, but it also means that which must be eliminated, exterminated. The Nazi regime applied this word both to the Jewish people and to the truth from Stalingrad. In the end, neither could be suppressed. The letters from Stalingrad, like the survivors of the camps, bore witness to crimes and catastrophes that their perpetrators desperately wished to hide. Their voices, speaking across the decades, remind us that truth, however unbearable, cannot ultimately be silenced. As we approach the 83rd anniversary of that terrible Christmas at Stalingrad, we would do well to remember not the propaganda lies or the heroic myths, but the honest words of Lieutenant Kurt Reuber and the soldiers whose final letters revealed the truth. They wrote of light, life, and love, even as all three were being extinguished around them. They wrote of mothers and homes and simple human decency, even as they faced certain death in a meaningless battle. They wrote in their final hours, not as Germans or as soldiers of the Reich, but as human beings confronting the universal realities of suffering and mortality. That, perhaps, is the real miracle of Christmas at Stalingrad, that even in the depths of hell, even when abandoned by leaders and seemingly forsaken by God, the human spirit could still reach for something transcendent, something beyond the immediate horror. Whether it was found in Reuber's charcoal Madonna, in a stolen hour listening to Beethoven, or in the simple act of writing one final honest letter home, men trapped in that frozen inferno refused to surrender their humanity entirely. Brigadier General Marshall was right. They were Germans, in that hour our enemies. But who may read their words and not weep for them? We are documenting the complete history of the Eastern Front day by day. We are currently fewer than 130 subscribers away from our goal of 1,000. If you want to see the next chapter of this story, please subscribe now. It truly helps the archive. Thank you.